All right, so today we're taking a deep dive, to Plato's Republic,
Oh, excellent.
specifically some selections that you picked out.
Yeah.
Um, and, we're talking about justice and the perfect society and what it even means to be human.
Yeah. Big questions.
Big questions, right? Big stuff. No pressure.
No pressure at all.
But we're not going to do like a full-on philosophy lecture or anything like
Yeah.
that. Instead, we're gonna look for those little interesting nuggets.
Yeah.
Plato's thinking that are still surprisingly relevant, like thousands of years later.
Well, it's fascinating how these ideas about ideal societies still resonate with us today. Plato gives us this framework for thinking about justice, power, and the good society.
He does.
So
let's start with Cephalus.
Okay.
He's this older, wealthy Athenian who seems pretty content with his life.
Yeah.
And Plato contrasts that with how we often think about aging.
Right.
Like it's all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But Cephalus is like, no, no, no.
He's like, I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. And one reason he gives is that his wealth keeps him from being tempted to be dishonest.
That's an interesting point.
It is an interesting point.
He says because he's not desperate, he doesn't have to cut corners.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So does being rich actually make you more ethical?
Hmm.
What do you think?
I don't know.
I'm not sure I buy it,
Yeah.
but there's something to be said for not having to worry about basic needs.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about the relationship between wealth and morality.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of questions, it's worth noting that Cephalus kind of bows out of the heavier philosophical debate
Oh, he does.
later on.
Yeah.
Like he can't keep up,
Right.
which, makes me think about how we often underestimate older people.
It's easy to fall into those assumptions, isn't it?
It is.
We dismiss experience and wisdom as if they become obsolete.
Yeah, totally. So we've got contentment with age,
Yeah.
the link between wealth and honesty.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a character who brings a whole different energy. Thrasymachus. Now he's a smooth talker,
Oh, yeah.
but maybe not such a deep thinker.
Mm.
And he throws out this super cynical idea that rulers are only ever out for themselves.
Oh, yeah. He's the ultimate cynic.
Really?
He argues that those in power, just like everyone else, are motivated by self-interest.
Yeah, it's depressing how much that's true.
Right.
I mean, think about all the scandals we see.
Yeah.
Politicians lobbying for their own businesses.
Yeah.
CEOs getting those massive bonuses while their employees are struggling.
It makes you wonder, are they truly acting for the common good?
Right. Are they playing some kind of angle?
Yeah.
Big questions, Plato.
Big questions.
So from thinking about individuals like Cephalus and Thrasymachus, we shift to how Plato sees society as a whole forming.
Okay.
And he keeps it pretty basic at the start.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the fundamental human needs, right?
Exactly. People need food, shelter, clothing.
Right.
So they come together and they start specializing.
Okay.
You have farmers, builders, weavers, shoemakers.
Like the original division of labor. You make the bread, I'll build a house and we'll trade.
Simple.
Right?
Simple.
Except it gets complicated quickly.
Oh, how so?
Because Plato points out that as soon as you have this interaction and exchange,
Yeah.
you get the potential for fairness and unfairness, justice and injustice.
So from basic needs to the complexities of a justice system,
Yeah,
it's logical, but it also highlights how quickly things can get complicated.
exactly.
Speaking of not so simple, let's talk about Plato's surprising take on poetry.
Oh, yeah.
He was pretty wary of it, especially for young people.
He was.
This one threw me for a loop. I mean, we think of poetry as beautiful, moving, inspiring even,
Right.
but Plato saw a dark side.
He did. He was concerned with how it could affect people's character, especially the young and impressionable.
Especially them.
And he specifically calls out Homer's epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey,
Right.
because of some of the behavior depicted in them.
Like the gods disguising themselves.
Yeah.
Heroes acting less than heroic. Sometimes villains succeed. Exactly. And Plato worried that these portrayals could give people a skewed sense of right and wrong.
It's interesting because it connects to all the conversations we have today about the media we consume and the impact it has on us.
It does.
Are violent video games desensitizing us?
Yeah.
Do social media filters create unrealistic beauty standards?
It's the same question.
It's the same question, just in a different form.
Centuries ahead of his time.
Yeah. All right. So we've gone from avoiding dishonesty to questioning leaders to worrying about the influence of art.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Let's talk about another area where Plato gets really specific.
Okay.
Music.
Music.
He didn't just see it as entertainment.
Oh,
He believed that different types of music could actually cultivate different qualities in a person.
interesting.
Yeah. So he thought certain types of music, like those using the Lydian mode or played on the flute, could stir up negative emotions or were simply too complex.
Hmm.
He much preferred simpler melodies and instruments. Think Dorian and Phrygian modes played on instruments like the lyre or harp.
So it's not just about enjoying a good tune.
Right.
It's about, like, the ethical implications. It's like
Exactly.
he's creating a whole playlist for building ideal character.
Exactly. And it makes you think about the debates we still have today about different genres of music.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, do certain types make people more aggressive?
Right.
Or is it all just artistic expression?
It all goes way back.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that go way back, remember how we were talking about the guardians in Plato's ideal state?
Yeah.
Those responsible for protecting and leading?
Yes.
Well, initially you were a little surprised that the whole conversation seemed to leave women out.
Yeah, you were right to point that out. It seemed like a pretty glaring omission,
Yeah.
especially in a conversation about building the most just and effective society.
Yeah,
But in Book 5 of the Republic, Plato finally addresses this
he does.
head on.
And he makes a pretty radical claim for his time.
He does.
He argues that men and women fundamentally have the same nature, even if their abilities might differ in some ways.
Right? He even compares it to doctors. Just because a male doctor and a female doctor might have slightly different skills or strengths
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're not both capable of practicing medicine.
Right.
And he takes it even further than that Plato envisions women training alongside men for all roles in society, even those requiring physical strength like soldiering.
That's huge, especially given the ancient Greek context.
It is.
It completely upends the traditional gender roles.
Right.
It makes me think, how far have we really come since then in achieving true gender equality?
That's a good question.
I mean, we still have these debates about women in combat roles,
Yeah.
equal pay, and so many other areas.
It's a reminder that these radical ideas from centuries ago still resonate in the present.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears to what might be Plato's most famous idea, the philosopher king.
Okay.
So what exactly did he mean by that?
The philosopher king is Plato's ideal ruler.
Okay.
It's not enough for this leader to be smart or powerful. They have to love wisdom and be able to apply that wisdom to governing justly.
So they're not just like making decisions based on what's popular or convenient.
Right.
They're tapping into this deeper understanding of truth and goodness.
Exactly. But Plato is very clear that finding these philosopher kings is incredibly difficult.
Why is that?
Well, they need to be intelligent, courageous, and have a rock-solid character.
Right.
These qualities don't often come packaged together.
It's true.
And even if you find them, getting them into power is another challenge.
Why is that?
Well, Plato talks about this longer road to knowledge, this rigorous process of seeking truth and understanding the form of the good. It's not for the faint of heart.
No.
And most people aren't really interested in this kind of deep thinking, so they don't value it in their leaders.
It's like that saying, people get the leaders they deserve.
Right. Plato actually uses a parable to illustrate how tough it is for philosophers to lead in a society that doesn't understand them.
Okay, tell me more.
So it's the parable of the ship. And the captain, imagine a ship captain who's a bit deaf and blind, not the best sailor.
Okay.
But he represents the true knowledge, that deeper understanding.
All right.
The crew, on the other hand, they represent the masses.
Got it.
They want to steer, even though they have no clue about navigation.
So they
Basically, they drug the captain, then take over the ship, and then praise anyone who goes along with the mutiny as a good pilot.
Wow.
Anyone who tries to point out that they're heading in the wrong direction is ridiculed or ignored.
That's a pretty bleak metaphor.
It is.
It's like when experts get dismissed or facts get twisted to fit an agenda.
Exactly.
So we've talked about this ideal leader, but what about other forms of government?
Yeah.
I know Plato outlined several, right?
He describes 5 in total: aristocracy, timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is how he connects each of these to a corresponding type of individual.
So it's not just about the structure of the government itself,
Right?
but about the character of the people within it.
Exactly. Let's take a look at a few of these types. You've got the timocrat, who is ambitious, values honor, and thrives in systems with a strong sense of duty and military prowess.
Sounds a bit like those Spartan warriors always striving for glory on the battlefield.
Then you have the oligarch, who's completely fixated on wealth and material possessions.
Mm-hmm.
Their primary goal is financial gain, often at the expense of others.
Right.
They can be exploitative and disconnected from the needs of everyday people.
It's giving Scrooge McDuck vibes.
Yeah.
Money is their only motivation.
And that kind of relentless pursuit of wealth often leads to social problems.
For sure.
Then there's the Democrat, who values freedom and individual expression above all else. They tend to be tolerant and open-minded, but they can also be excessive and lack discipline.
So maybe a bit rebellious, but not necessarily bad people.
Right.
Just not the most structured or organized.
Exactly. And Plato argues that without some sense of moderation and restraint, this kind of unrestrained freedom can lead to chaos.
That makes sense. Too much of anything can be a bad thing.
Right.
All right, and finally we have the tyrant.
Yeah.
Not exactly a word that brings warm fuzzies to mind.
Definitely not. The tyrant is driven purely by their own passions and desires, with a relentless thirst for power and control, no matter the cost.
Think classic dictator ruling with an iron fist, completely disregarding the well-being of their people.
Exactly. And Plato believed that tyranny was the absolute worst form of government, leading to suffering for both the ruler and those being ruled.
So we've got these 5 forms of government, each reflecting a different type of person.
Right.
It's almost like Plato's giving us a psychological profile of societies.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a link between these types? Like, do they evolve from one to another?
That's a great question, and Plato does suggest a kind of progression, or maybe regression is a better word. He thinks that even the best-case scenario, that aristocracy led by wise philosopher kings, is susceptible to decay over time.
So it's not a static system.
Yeah.
Even the ideal can become corrupted.
Right. Plato suggests that the focus on virtue and wisdom can gradually fade, giving way to a more militaristic, honor-driven society, the timocracy.
So that noble ideal gets twisted.
Exactly. And as the emphasis on honor and military strength intensifies, so does the desire for wealth and possessions, eventually paving the way for oligarchy.
So the love of money takes over.
Yes, and as wealth gets concentrated in the hands of a few, you see more inequality, leading to resentment and unrest among the people.
Right.
That's what sets the stage for democracy, where the people rise up and demand more power.
But as we've discussed, without some moderation, democracy can become unstable.
Exactly.
And in that instability, someone who's cunning and power-hungry can swoop in, promising order but delivering tyranny. It's a pretty bleak picture of how even well-intentioned systems can crumble.
It's a cautionary tale about the fragility of good governance. Plato believed that understanding these different forms of government and the individual types they reflect was crucial for building and maintaining a just and stable society.
Wow, heavy stuff. It's like he's saying, know thyself and know thy society, or risk descending into chaos.
Right.
Maybe we can lighten the mood a bit.
Well, maybe not lighten the mood, but definitely shift gears. Let's talk about the myth of Ur.
Okay, story time. Tell me all about this myth of Ur.
The myth of Ur is this incredible story about the afterlife. Ur is a warrior who dies in battle, but then miraculously comes back to life.
Okay.
And during his time being dead, he gets a glimpse of what happens to souls after they leave the earthly realm.
So it's like a peek behind the curtain of the great beyond.
Exactly.
What did he see?
He saw a sort of cosmic lottery where souls line up and get to choose their next lives.
Wait, they get to choose.
They do.
That's a pretty empowering vision of the afterlife.
It is. It suggests we have a degree of free will and responsibility for our own destiny, even beyond this life.
But here's the catch. Not all souls choose wisely.
Right, some are drawn to lives of wealth or power, while others get blinded by their desires, just like in their previous life.
So even in the afterlife, people make bad choices.
Sadly, yes. But the myth of Ur really emphasizes the importance of choosing a life based on virtue and wisdom.
Yeah.
Those who live just and noble lives previously tend to make wiser choices for their next life, while those who are consumed by vice often repeat those same mistakes.
It's like that saying, we are what we repeatedly do.
Right.
So the myth of Ur is ultimately a call to live virtuously.
Exactly. It reminds us that our choices matter, not just for our happiness in this life, but for what comes after.
Yeah.
And it also ties back to one of the core themes we've been discussing, the power of ideal.
Oh, co-ideals. Let's talk about that.
Plato's Republic, for all its complex philosophical arguments, is essentially a blueprint for the ideal society.
Okay.
It's a vision of a world where justice, wisdom, and virtue reign supreme.
Okay.
And this vision has had a massive impact on thinkers and reformers throughout history.
Can you give us an example?
Think about Thomas More's Utopia, written centuries after the Republic. More was clearly inspired by Plato's work. He uses this fictional island society to critique the injustices of his own time, painting a picture of a community based on common ownership and social harmony.
So he took Plato's ideal and used it as a yardstick to measure his own society against.
Exactly, and More wasn't alone. Countless philosophers, political theorists, and social activists have drawn on Plato's Republic in their efforts to create a more just and equitable world.
So even though Plato's ideal state might be impossible to fully achieve, it's still a powerful force for good.
Absolutely. It pushes us to always strive for something better, even if we never reach perfection. It's the pursuit itself that matters, that constant effort to improve ourselves and our society.
That's inspiring, but it also makes me wonder if we can't achieve Plato's ideal society in its entirety. What aspects are worth striving for in the real world?
That's a question each of us has to grapple with. And perhaps by engaging with these ideals, we can inch a little closer to the kind of world Plato envisioned, a world where justice and wisdom prevail.
You know, it's amazing to think that even after all these centuries, we're still like wrestling with the same fundamental questions.
I know.
About justice and power and what it means to create a good society.
Right.
Plato might have been writing thousands of years ago, but he's still somehow part of the conversation.
He is, and that's what makes this deep dive into the Republic so valuable.
Yeah.
It's not just about, learning some historical facts. It's about engaging with these enduring questions that have challenged thinkers for generations.
Yeah, it's like he gives us a toolkit for critical thinking,
He does.
encouraging us to examine our own assumptions about how the world works and how it should work.
I think one of the most powerful takeaways for me from this exploration is this recurring theme of individual choice.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about, Cephalus choosing contentment in old age,
Right.
or the souls in the myth of choosing their next lives,
Right.
or us trying to build a more just society today, it all comes back to the decisions we make.
That's so true. And it's not always easy to make those choices, you know?
It's not.
Especially when we're like bombarded with so many different voices and ideas.
Right.
Which brings us back to that final question we posed earlier.
Okay.
If you were standing in her shoes, ready to choose your next life, what principles would guide your decision?
Yeah. What values would you prioritize? What kind of world would you strive to create?
It's a question worth pondering, not just as an abstract thought experiment, but as a way to examine our own lives and, the impact we want to have.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Plato's Republic.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and as always, keep diving deep.